Hello again. So let's walk through a detail of this application known as the Artificially Intelligent CEO, or known as the Artificial Intelligent Executive Branch. In this application, we've noticed as we're walking through it, it is automatically associating some of our desired outcomes with very direct requirements that have been selected. And then upon each, we also notice there's transparency on the outcome of the estimation. What this means is, as we're exploring and discovering what our business requires to be successful, we're realizing the costs right away. That allows us to make decisions, and we can weigh certain factors. And as we reprioritize as we go through, we notice that the estimation might adjust, which gives us kind of a good ballpark of where we best could invest to realize our gains. So the idea with this video is we'd like to go through the calculations of the estimations in detail so we can better understand what's going on behind the scenes. That way we can understand how we can incorporate some other mechanisms and or be comfortable with the mechanism that we have in place. Okay, so if you visit Comculate.com and you go through the application, click the About to get an idea of what this application is about. And within the About section, you'll notice that there's a subsection which is called the Estimation Calculation Framework. If you expand on that, you can get some more information on the calculation framework. So I'd like to first cover what a calculation framework is and provide an example. Then we can go through some of the existing estimation techniques that are predominantly used today in projects. And then we can see how we've correlated those popular estimation techniques into this application. Okay, so first, let's go over what a calculation framework is and some examples. So what a calculation framework is you have a structure or some entity in place, some type of logic in place, where you can simply easily configure some settings and to have some reoccurring expected outcome of your calculation based on some framework. So you have some parameters, you have some structure in place, and the idea is to exploit those capabilities, you need some type of means to be able to intercept some of those factors so that you can put weight on the outcome of your calculation. An example of a calculation framework is, let's say on eCommerce, there's some nice applications that have some calculation capabilities within it. One application that I've consulted with has a very high level common calculation framework that impacts anything to do with calculation within any scenario in any e-commerce application. Now, I'm going to go into how this works. I'll uncover how this calculation framework works. But first, let me tell you that it's been quite successful for me. I've been able to consult for IKEA, for Scholastic, for Freightliner, for Philips, for Museum of Modern and Art, amongst other clients like Pratt & Whitney. I could go on and on about a lot of these e-commerce solutions, B2C and B2B, to which I've been able to consult some very successful calculation outcome. No matter how complicated or complex it is, I've been able to leverage this consistent calculation framework to accomplish the goals, to not only to give me the opportunity to consult, but also to ensure a successful outcome for the clients. So let's talk about this particular calculation framework example so we can understand how it is that something is structured that we can leverage. So this particular calculation framework, really, if you just break down what it is fundamentally consisting of, it is just based on a number of calculation usages, with a number of calculation rules, with some calculation codes, with some calculation ranges, and some calculation lookup values. That's the basis of the framework. And the idea is you want to have some mechanism where you can independently configure each of these areas that I just called out and be able to have a flexible, consistent framework in which you can leverage each of these moving parts to be able to cohesively work together. What that means is you can independently define some calculation usages, which might be, let's say, tax or discounting on an order, or shipping tax. So on top of that, you have some rules, and those rules might be a number of any business rules you can think of. It's more on the business side or the business capability, any of these calculation rules that might apply. So you might have some rules on discount, which might be a fixed or percentage. You might have some rules on tax where you might be more persistent to calculate on a jurisdiction level or on a flat level, etc. So there's different ways of using your rules, and you want to have some flexible way to easily configure those rules. Then you have your ranges, and your ranges could be shared amongst your other calculation usages, but the ranges might be related to, let's say, a jurisdiction, and those ranges might have some type of model associated with it. So for example, let's say you might have a concentric range where you want to define ranges by some diameter on, let's say, latitude and longitude coordinates. Or you might just have simple ranges that might just be a range, let's say if you have a postal code or some type of zip, you might have a range where you could establish a number of codes within a range, and anything that falls suit within that, let's say a naming convention pattern, let's say something falls into a pattern, let's say any postal code that starts with an M might fall in a particular range, and then a calculation would adhere to that particular range that's configured. Then you have your lookup values, and your lookup values can have a number of factors associated with it, including whether it's fixed percentage, whether it has some type of weight associated with it, or some other factor that might be incorporated into the calculation. So the idea here is you have a calculation framework that you can reuse across a number of usages, and you have one consistent framework that can be used that can calculate anything in your application. That flexibly allows you to understand one perspective on how to configure something, and you can depend on that application to consistently roll out those calculations across a number of different business purposes. So that's the idea of a calculation framework, and I just gave you an example where this has been used quite successfully. So we try to emulate that in Comculate, in that we try to come up with a consistent framework on how we calculate our estimations when we are prioritizing our business. And why is that important? It's important so that we can not only realize our budget and plan for the next quarter or year or 3 years, but on top of that, we can track our budget and find a consistent manner to further refine that budget and realize that, if we're under or above, exceeding budget expectations, and why that is, and learn from our velocity and our progress. So let's jump right into what is set up on Comculate by first understanding where we're deriving our estimation modeling from. So as I talked to you about earlier about the calculation framework on how to calculate on an e-commerce site, let's say you want to calculate discounts or shipping or tax, there's some consistent manner to how you can set it up that can be easily configurable. Well, we'd like to accomplish the same when we're calculating estimations. So what we've done is we've taken popular estimation techniques that we use in project management. So I'm a PMP, and I've been a PMP for a while, since 2005. And to be able to be a successful project manager, you have to have a good understanding of various estimation techniques and understand the pros and cons of each. So let's review that here. We have a matrix here, a factor analysis matrix that compares all of the different estimation techniques across each other, so that we can understand the pros and cons. So let me just blow up this table here so we can see it popping out and in detail. And as you can see, there's a list of estimation techniques. We have top-down, bottom-up, Analagous, Parametric, 3-point, and of course we follow up with the Calculate estimation technique, which is a technique used in this application. So I'll review each by just kind of high-leveling what each estimate technique is, and then compare those across these factors of preparation, risk, accuracy, and benefit. If you want to understand more about what each means, you just simply highlight the help icon and it'll pop out with what each of those mean, but I'll quickly go through them too as I walk through each of the comparisons. So if we look at top-down, the top-down estimate is basically where you start with like a high-level feature or a component, and from there you either have learned from the past. You can take kind of a high-level ballpark from past initiatives, or you have a third-party consultant that can provide you with a high-level ballpark of what most likely is the estimate for the cost. And then from there, as you understand more about the requirements that are emulated from this particular investment, you then are able to decompose that, understand the assumptions and constraints of particular use cases and requirements, and then be able to extrapolate and understand, refine those numbers. So that's top down. Now let's just go through the factor analysis for top down first. If we look at the preparation means any calculation, anything you need to move forward with to provide an estimation, you need some unbiased, valid input to be able to provide a consistent estimation. So that requires preparation. So we suggest in a top-down estimate technique that it's very low cost to prepare all that information. So the idea is if you start at the top, you require less information to provide some ballpark estimate. The risk to a top-down is, since you don't have enough information to really get that accurate information, you need to add more contingency to your budget, and so that's one of the cons of using this technique. And so, but the accuracy actually can become more realizable as you're decomposing all of your requirements, as you're moving from the top down. As you're moving forward, you basically just need to continually attest that your information is correct. And usually you'll notice with the top-down technique, sometimes you start with a big number or a big budget, and as you decompose, your budget refines and becomes more realizable. Or you'll notice in some cases, let's say you have a highly competitive project where you have, let's say, different vendors or individuals competing to be able to participate in that project, they most likely will provide you the lowest possible budget to move forward. But then as you go from top down and as you decompose what you're actually going to deliver, you realize that your budget is not as little as you were first told, and you find your budget grows over time as you get more information. So that's one of the accuracy points of the top-down process. The benefit of a top-down is you can quickly get your budget planning complete, which helps you get approval, helps you move forward, provides confidence to onboard your teams and get working. So let's switch to the bottom-up. So the bottom-up is usually the go-to that everybody wants in their project. So they want that bottom-up estimate because it provides more accuracy. There's a lot of cost to that though. The cost is when you want to prepare all that information, you actually have to onboard a team, you have to delegate work, and then that team or vendor actually moves forward with collecting all the input required for the estimation. And so that actually is a high cost. And in theory, that actually uses up contingency that's not yet even realized. So you're actually burning contingency that you haven't even declared as the contingency, but you need to get to the bottom up. So you can see there's some con to the pros of you have more accurate information. And as you get that bottom up, if you are patient enough to wait for the bottom up estimates, you'll realize the risk is a lot lower. You can reduce that contingency overhead that you need, that will be your realized contingency in your budget. So there is the benefits of this process is budget saving. So I'm going to quickly go through the other estimates techniques because I want to get into the calculate and make this a quicker video. So the analagous and parametric and 3-point. Those are different techniques where you are able to have some type of structure, more sound and somewhat more calculative, more mathematical, and something more logical. So an analagous is where you have expert opinion, and your experts provide some metrics and some basis for an estimate, and then if that basis aligns with your strategy, you can use that expert opinion to solidify your budget and move forward. Your parametric is basically, a parametric is something that actually contributes towards a data science discipline, and it actually helps you. This is a reusable process that could be used throughout any other aspect of learning from your data or benefiting from data enrichment. So parametric, what that means is you can anchor some type of parameter that is consistent across all initiatives or all requirements. And in this scenario, basically you have like a consistent factor that you are able to use as input into the calculation, and then you just multiply that by the number of initiatives or requirements that are involved. So for example, let's say you have 8 requirements, and all 8 requirements most likely have the same amount of effort involved. Well, you just have some parameter that can calculate in one context the amount of work that's required, and then you just multiply that by 8. So that's your parametric. Now 3-point is more interesting. I find that 3-point is more beneficial when you're dealing with sampling or you're dealing with statistical modeling. 3-point is where you quite simply have a pessimistic or an optimistic range of values, and then from there you can provide an estimate, and from there, if you have a nice deviation, a standard deviation or a good normal distribution to follow, you can actually find an average of those points between the pessimistic and optimistic values to be able to come up with a nice estimation that's very sound. This actually helps you navigate your contingency, helps you navigate your budget, and you are always prepared for best and worst case. The real value of a 3-point is that you can prepare yourself for anything that could happen in the market, and you're adaptable. So the idea with this application is to incorporate all of those estimation techniques, and that's what this calculate estimation technique is striving to achieve. So you can actually highlight here to review that technique. If you use this technique, you're actually more artificially intelligent sound. You are able to stabilize your budget, and all of the benefits of all the other estimation techniques are realized by using this technique. So right away, I'd like to just jump in some examples of how we are able to interplay this technique in the application, so you can get an understanding just kind of visually on how this operates. So let's jump out of the about, and let's go into the designation or discovery. And if you remember when we went through discovery in our other video, if you click the wrenches for any of your capabilities that you're looking to invest upon, these wrenches mean that these capabilities require attention, require investment. If you click any of these, what it does is it actually correlates with a number of use cases and requirements as part of that feature or component. So I just wanted to quickly open that up to review that. And what happens is you have a tree that is pre-selecting certain requirements that have been selected based on what you're investing in from a desired outcome perspective. From here, to be able to estimate, as you can see, there's an estimation here of $148,000. Where that is realized is what we do is we use a top-down perspective to assign values. And if we click the component, for example, this component has a list of teams. So we assign a optimistic and pessimistic value of amount of time it takes per team on a team per team basis. So this allows us to have a parametric modeling technique. It also allows for an analagous technique in which we can have experts from each team provide their numbers or their estimates that are relative to a specific component. Now, we're not asking them to do this requirement by requirement because that's much too exhaustive and we would have to wait too long to actually get that estimation. So we're trying to interplay both top-down and bottom-up techniques in a way where we can get enriched information as soon as possible. So you can see here, you can preset your numbers for what you expect a component would take team by team, and then you can set notes on why that reasoning is, and your experts can come in and that represent each team, and they can come in and they can provide numbers, and they can also share their notes of why they expect the estimations to be numerically adjusted in such a manner. On top of that, at the component level, we have a level of effort. And the level of effort is just used as a way to mathematically compute something relevant against the numbers, whether it's a multiplier or if you have a standard deviation against some standard deviation if you have a normal distribution of information of data. Now, you'll say, well, what about the bottom up? We still need to include a way to have the requirements bottom up its information so that we can impact that on the estimation. Well, on the requirement, if you click the requirement, you can actually set a complexity level, and you can set the target systems. And the target systems have a variability of context that can be included in the calculation. The more systems, the more the weight to the calculation. On top of that, the complexity factor will also have some play in the calculation. How do you set the complexity? Well, it is somewhat based on subjective information, not only objective, but the complexity, you'll basically, let's say subjectively, you'll want to assign something higher if you have less information or you've collected less input into your estimation. You'll set a higher complexity, and then once this requirement is more known and you are comfortable with the systems, you can lower the complexity, and then that will impact the outcome of your estimation. Okay, great. So I just wanted to quickly go over this calculation framework to provide you with some insight, a detail of how this application works, so that we can understand how we're reliably coming up with these estimation numbers as we're exploring, discovering, and refining the priorities we're setting for our business. Explore this matrix table. You can get an understanding of all the factors by just highlighting the help icons, and you can understand the different estimation techniques to understand those as well. The idea here is in order to have an artificially intelligent solution, you need to be open-minded to understand all the different perspectives and incorporate that in some manner, in some design, to be able to manage the complexity of everything in a simplified manner. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day. Thank you.